Good afternoon, Belgrade. I'm delighted to be here. We're talking about a very important issue, looking at the future of work and what the future of work looks like over the next 10, 15 years. The first provocation I want to put forward to you is the future of work is not limited. There is plenty of work to come around over the next 10 years. If you look at the scale of the transition that we are facing as a society, whether it's the decarbonization issues or issues to do with automation, over the next 10 years, we will see the most significant transformation of human society and civilization that we have seen in our generation, almost certainly. And too often the discourse about the future of work has been reduced to the robots are taking our jobs. I would like to argue that's not the case, not yet anyway. And what we need to think about is how we make this transition. Historically, when you look at these sort of large social transitions, they are a function as much of technology as institutional innovation. Increasingly, our responses have been, let's focus on the technology and burn the institutions. Whereas if you look at the history of industrial revolutions, it is a symbiosis of technological innovation and institutional innovation, which will be fundamental to the transition. So if we want to talk about the future of work, we have to start to think about a great transition in our society and civilization. Further, when we start to think about that in that sense, increasingly we're seeing around the world, we've got conversations going on in Europe about how you fund 100 million for 100 cities across Europe to focus on this transition. Historically, in these sort of large-scale transitions, what we've seen is the concentration of capital. Disaster tends to actually drive the concentration of capital and wealth. So one major hedge fund in Scotland turned around and said, decarbonization and climate change was a bigger opportunity than China multiplied by the internet. China multiplied by the internet. So when you look at the scale of the transformation, it will change everything. How many of you eat meat? Put your hands up. Right, most of you will not be eating meat. So we will all be moving towards vegan food supply chains. Look at just that issue. If you look at some of the Scandic countries, for example, you will see already, right, they are at 4.5 tons of carbon a year. But if you look at the consumption side, they're at 11 tons per person. So the scale of decarbonization is going to change everything about our lives. What we eat, how we work, how we live. Milan is looking to plant 3 million trees to deal with climate change. How do you finance 3 million trees when trees don't even exist on the balance sheet of cities? They're a cost. They're looking to reduce car travel by 50% to deal with the requirements of climate change. That is not just about that issue. That is about fundamentally changing the economic geography of a city. So when I talk about the next 10 years, I would argue that we're in a fundamental transition. This will change global supply chains, what we eat, how we eat, what we produce, where it's produced, what's circular, what's not circular. At the same time, automation is going to destroy a different type of job. How many of you have heard of a really brilliant company called Bertsurger? Okay. Bertsurger is a Dutch care company, neighborhood care company for citizens. It has 15,000 nurses. It has 150 people in headquarters. There is no middle management. So if you want to look at the future of automation, I would say the future of automation is post-managerial cities. It is the destruction of management that is almost certainly the key issue with automation and administration. So all the glass tower buildings that we've been building, I would say they are the ones most strategically at threat in this transition. In Bertsurger, the nurses are now better paid. They'd have more responsibility. It's the administrators and managers that have disappeared. Uber didn't destroy the taxi driver yet. It destroyed the taxi office. So what we're about to see is the destruction of middle class and middle administration. In that future, we are seeing the bifurcation of human development and human labor to low-value service jobs, emotional labor, and very high value. How do we support that transition? In the 17th and 18th century, we built schools. We built a whole idea of welfare and human development. What does that look like in the 21st century? What does that look like for a high-performance human cognitive emotional economy? We have to reimagine our institutional infrastructures from schools, from nurseries, to universities. How we create knowledge, and our thesis of innovation is no longer about cometry innovation. It's about deep innovation. How do we create places for deep innovation is a fundamentally economic thesis to the model of urbanism we've been developing. At the same time, I would say there's a whole bunch of structural responses. The idea of the corporate form, will that last the next 10 years? Will the corporate form exist in the 21st century with distributed databases and system scale accounting? Will we be operating fundamentally in a different format? Will land rights and property rights still be the basic means of operating? Increasingly, we're seeing experiments going on all around the world that property is a form of slavery. How do we reimagine the idea of self-sovereignty of things, places, environments, trees? What does that do to our relationship to the world? So the thesis I want to leave you with as we open this conversation is not to start with the deficit of jobs, but talk about the scale of change that we're about to see, which is fundamental to the nature of our economy and the nature of how we live and work. And what does human development look like in that framework? And what does our institutional economy look like in that future? It's too easy to be captured by the deficit of the world. I think there's a strategic opportunity. And we're going to see capital expended across the world of an order that we've not seen. And here, often people say, well, we're too small, we're too big, we can't do this. Well, the reality is, who's leading some of these conversations? We're increasingly seeing these conversations led all around the world, from Vietnam to Singapore to Helsinki. This is not about size, it's about agility. It's about strategy, it's about having a cultural vision as well as having an institutional vision. And so my plea to this future is that actually it's incredibly doable and it's necessary. And if we don't make this transition, either at an inclusive level, then the likelihood is we will massively increase inequality, we will actually not deal with climate change, and as a global civilization, I think we'll be severely under threat, because for the current projections are that if we don't, current business models of large corporations, basically every corporation, I think, under the S&P 100 and 500, almost all of them are actually non-viable if you costed the cost of carbon. They're non-viable. I would argue most businesses don't even operate when you actually price in externalities. So we're seeing a fundamental transition. And the question is, how do you create that? And technology, yes, there's a whole new class of technologies available. My big thing is we miss the institutional innovations to drive that future. And too often, the discourse by entrepreneurs and capitalists is get rid of the regulation and everything is fine. And I would say, no. It's about reinventing our institutions to actually support the new technologies and new capacities fit for the 21st century, but at a deep code level. What are property rights? What is land ownership? All the way through to what do property rights operate like in an intangible assets economy? Our assets that we create in this new economy are fundamentally different. So we need a new mechanism of financing and investing in them. So as we look forward into this conversation, my provocation is, I think this is a strategic opportunity. And it's necessary for us as a global civilization to do it. With that, I thank you.